In this video, I want to give you my honest review of the adventure Waterdeep Dragon Heist, which is a published adventure for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. I'll be taking a look at what the adventure is, what it does great, what it does less great, and who I think the adventure is for, and finally answer that question, should you buy it and should you run it? If you don't know who I am, my name is J.A. with Eventyr Games, and I'm also the author of the adamantine best-selling complete DM's bundle for Waterdeep Dragon Heist. So Waterdeep Dragon Heist is an adventure that I've really studied and I've really put work into actually understanding and creating some cool content for, and also writing a guide to help other DMs run. Now, just the fact that there's been sold more than 10,000 copies of a guide to the adventure should tell you that Waterdeep Dragon Heist isn't a perfect adventure. Waterdeep is in essence an adventure for 1st to 5th level players in an urban setting where the characters have to chase this big catch of gold throughout the city of Waterdeep and eventually, finally, hopefully, secure the gold and either try and take it for themselves or deliver it back to the city. Before we dive into the parts that led to there actually being a need for a guide to the adventure, I want to first talk about what I think is great about Waterdeep Dragon Heist. Now, I've reviewed Waterdeep Dragon Heist in an article before. I've talked about it in other videos, as well as a tier list video you can find a link for somewhere here. And my thoughts on Waterdeep Dragon Heist have always been mixed, but I find that when I think back on my time running the adventure, it's really one of my more enjoyable experiences running D&D. Now, there can be many reasons for this, the party, the players, the way the story just played out, but I find that Waterdeep Dragon Heist is, in my opinion, a charming, fun, and exciting adventure. Now, it's not perfect by any means, but what I think it does well is that it has a really great setting. Waterdeep is fleshed out in the book. I think they put a lot of effort into making Waterdeep feel alive, and you get that urban big city feel. They've actually managed to make an exciting adventure out of just being in one single city, and that's something I think the adventure does really well. The adventure also has great artwork throughout. I think that the many art pieces you get really get that sense of city life going, and you get a feeling that you're in an urban setting playing an urban adventure, and it's all about these villains and gold that's being stolen and investigations. I think that's really cool. The villains are also a high point here. The fact that you can choose between 4 villains is something that I thought was really innovative and fun. Does it make it completely replayable, as Wizards of the Coast would tell you? I don't personally think so, but it does give it a fresh breath of air that you could play the adventure with one DM and have a very different experience than if you're playing it with another DM running another villain. I think that's something that's really fun, and I think they really tried out some new stuff with Waterdeep Dragon Heist, also with Chapter 4 that involves a lot of different scenes and locations you can go to, encounter chains you run through in different ways, and I think that's something that's, again, really great. I also think that the adventure is organized pretty well. While it can be confusing, convoluted, and we'll get into that, I think that the adventure does a decent job at laying out how the adventure is supposed to run and what's supposed to happen. Another high point for me is also Chapter 2, which is also a detriment to the adventure, but let's first start with why it's great. Chapter 2 is this downtime part of the adventure that the DM can spend as much or as little time in as they want, and which has a lot of great ideas for encounters and getting the characters involved with various factions and even the villains in ways that can really create a lot of intrigue and fun in the game. It's a move that I personally feel really makes the campaign come alive if you do spend that time getting into it. And that leads us to some of the less great things about the adventure, and that is first and foremost the amount of extra work the DM will have to put in on their own. Chapter 2 is a great example of this. You get a lot of cool ideas, you get a sense of how the chapter could run, and then you're left with ideas and you have to do all of the rest of the work yourself. For some DMs, this is just a great opportunity to really flex their imaginative muscles. For other DMs, this can become a giant hurdle. Luckily, there are products like our own Complete DMs bundle and other products on DMs Guild and a lot of friendly forums out there where you can get those ideas fleshed out, but you do have to do some legwork on your own or spend a little cash elsewhere to get that content. Secondly, the whole 4 different villains type thing also means that there is a lot of content in the book that you're not going to use. If you end up picking one villain, there's probably three, is that right? 3 villains that you end up not using. And that means that a quarter of the book goes out the window. You'll never get to use that content, those cool layers that is really fleshed out in the adventure, but you have no reason to use if you're not using that villain in your game. And that also goes for a lot of the ideas in chapter 2 and also the encounter chains in chapter 4. There's a lot of content that is going to be left on the cutting room floor because you simply can't use it in your game. Again, it's a pity and it makes the adventure feel really short, even though you get this big book, because you only really have content for those 5 levels and barely that. Another thing that could potentially be an issue is that the maps that are included in Adventure are these black and white maps from Dyson Logos. Now I really like Dyson Logos. I think he makes some very imaginative maps. He has some great ideas for map layouts, but black and white maps do just look less sexy on a virtual tabletop or printed out in person, and you may want to get that color feel. Again, it's something we provide in our DM's bundle. It's something you can find elsewhere on the internet as well. But when I really think about it, I think that my main critique of Waterdeep Dragon Heist actually has to do with the story itself. So even though I like the story, or I like the overall structure of the story, there are some really weak points in the story. It's a bit more convoluted than it probably had to be. It can be a bit hard to understand and follow for the players. So that's something that I think isn't a high point for the adventure. There's also a potentially very lackluster ending to the adventure, and this is probably the biggest error at all in the adventure. There isn't really a heist. There is a dungeon crawl thing at the end where you break into a vault and steal some gold, but it doesn't feel like a heist. There is potentially opportunities for heists if you run the adventure in specific ways, but it's something you as a DM would have to go out of your way to really set up. So that for me was probably the biggest disappointment I had with Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and that was reading through the book and realizing there's no heist in here. It's in the name, but it's not in the book, really. Again, something you would have to put some work into getting or buying resources that do for you. So if we weigh all these pros and cons, and there's probably some that I've forgotten and a lot of minor details that I've simply glossed over, some unbalanced encounters here, or the start that I think is actually really great. I love tavern starts, but all that aside, there are the big cons and the big pros. What do I think about the adventure? Who is it for? Should you buy it and should you run it? I think that any DM could run Waterdeep Dragon Heist, but I think it is especially meant for DMs who love Forgotten Realms and Waterdeep, and of course also DMs who like to run urban adventures that are more social, have a bit more intrigue, and more of that world building feel. We're building our own home, we get a tavern, let's flesh that out and let's get involved with these factions. If you're into that sort of style of adventure, Waterdeep Dragon Heist is a really, really good bet. It's also a great adventure for DMs who like to build on their own. If you like to have some space in the middle where you can put in your own encounters and your own little situations and spin off some ideas, it's also really, really great for that with that chapter 2, which I think it can be a strength for the adventure. Oddly enough, I also think that Waterdeep Dragon Heist is a decent adventure for new DMs. And that's not because it's the easiest adventure to run perhaps, but it's because it really gives you that feel of what D&D can be and really puts you on the spot to try and deliver on your own. Especially the first chapter, which actually is really easy to run and has that traditional tavern start, and then you go to this place to investigate a little, and then you end up here, and then you go to the next place. It's a dungeon, you crawl through, there's some minions, you attack them, you figure some stuff out. It's a traditional type of D&D feel that I really enjoy, and that is a soft start to the adventure, even if there is one nasty encounter in there that you probably need to rebalance. You can read about that in the guide or in the numerous videos on YouTube here about running Waterdeep Dragon Heist. Anyway, that aside, chapter 1 is a good soft start for a new DM, and then you get to that chapter 2 where you are forced to try and come up with some of your own ideas. And I think if you are up for the task, that's something that can be really a learning experience for a new DM. How do I make this short hook I have here, this short idea, into a fun encounter or a fun scenario that my players can play through? And that leads us to the final point. Should you buy Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and should you run Waterdeep Dragon Heist for your players? If you're just buying Waterdeep Dragon Heist and not expecting to run it, I would only buy it if I'm really interested in Waterdeep the city and would want to run another adventure there. Then you can take a lot of the stuff that's in there and use it in your own game. There's not a lot of stuff there and you would need for other games. There's not a lot of cool stat blocks or good maps that you can take and use otherwise. It's really just about Waterdeep and adventure. So if you're not going to run Waterdeep Dragon Heist, it's certainly not a book that you need in your collection, in my opinion. if you do want to run a 5e adventure, I think that running Waterdeep Dragon Heist really does bring something to the table. It's not a perfect adventure by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a really fun adventure, and it is by far the best example of an urban adventure we've gotten for 5th edition. So that's my opinion on Waterdeep Dragon Heist. It can be a good start adventure. It isn't a book that I would buy without running the adventure, and it is an adventure that I would run if I had time and if I wanted to get that urban adventure going on. I want to take this brief moment to just say thank you to some of our legend tier patrons over at patreon.com/eventyr. And today I wanted to say thanks to some of our oldest patrons, the ones who've been with us the longest. And those are Parker Seymour, Georgina Coffey, Ian Russell, Todd GRX, Aslan, Vincent Catanzaro, Rick, Matthew Brubaker, and Paul S. Thank you so much for supporting us on the Patreon, and if you want to support what we do here as well, you can check out patreon.com/eventyr, where we put out 5e content and you can help vote on which videos and articles we make. And you also get access to our complete archive of 5e content, so that is a whole lot of maps, encounters, monsters, magic items, and stuff like that. Alright, so that's it for this video. If you have some thoughts, let me know in the comments below, and if you like the video, you can like and subscribe. Everything really helps out. Aside from that, there's not a whole lot left to say, except thank you for watching, and I hope that I'll see you in the next video.